Hello there, kids. This is Strelok-Garhuul-Valandre-Stagrunner, and I have a special story for you today from the Glee Kink meme. The story is a kink involving blowjobs, secret relationships, and bottom bitches. The fic is an RPF, real person fanfic about the actor George Clooney and Christopher Colfer, who plays the gay character Kurt on the popular TV show Glee. And I don't have words for this. I really don't. So let's just get started. The tip of his finger slides smoothly around the top rim of his glass, the last few dregs of rum and coke gradually watering down with the ice cubes melting at the bottom, condensation slicking up his palm as he grasps and drains it smoothly in a single gulp before setting it down with a soft chink on the table. The room was relatively crowded, the stragglers gradually filtering in and out, people congratulating him and praising him for his performance. He thanks them graciously, though by that time he's starting to feel the effects of the first two drinks hit him, the third making its way down into his bloodstream, making him lucid and relaxed, and perhaps a little more flirtatious than he ought to be, as he makes his way across the room to where George is, chatting with Brad and a few other members of the company still lingering behind. "Chris!" Brad claps him on the shoulder genially, saying something about what an impact he's already had and how he's destined to have his name splattered across magazine covers and newspapers over the next few years if he keeps up his current path. Chris simply smiles and nods, eyes flickering back to George, who gives him a stern look and shakes his head almost imperceptibly from side to side. "And you and George," Brad is saying heartily, "you two should really work together sometime. You've got great chemistry." "You think?" Chris says sleekly, lips twisting up in a smile as George flashes him a warning look, lips drawn in a tight line. He knows he should be more discreet, but they've managed to keep it hidden this long, and lately he's been feeling a lot more rebellious towards the whole thing. He's even been so bold as to make the comment about wanting to have some sort of ring when the interviewers asked him about it the night before, when he'd already had 2 drinks to loosen his tongue, though they hadn't quite slurred his words and he was working with a half-level mind at least. Somehow he knew he was in trouble by the cool looks George has been throwing him all night. Not that he minds. If anything, him being upset will make for fantastic sex, so he knows he's coming out winning in the end either way. George finally manages to clear the rest of the guests out, Chris teetering to the bathroom to splash cool water on his face and wait until he hears the door close, followed shortly by the sound of approaching footsteps. "You can come out," says a clipped voice from the living room. He pats his dry face and steps into the hall, running his hand along the wall to steady himself, smiling wolfishly when he spots George sitting on the sofa by the empty fireplace. He's never understood the point of fireplaces in L.A., though he guesses the aesthetic of it overweighs the actual functionality. And isn't that how it is in Hollywood? He slips off his suit jacket and plops himself down on the couch, smirking when he sees George's nostrils flare and his head turning away from him slightly. "You're mad at me," he says softly. "You're being pretty obvious," George grunts, taking a sip from his drink and pulling a face where it's more water than alcohol and setting it down heavily on the side table. "Oh, come on, no one suspects a thing," Chris coos, words slipping and tangling together on his tongue, the alcohol tripping him up and making everything fuzzy around the edges. "I'll make you feel better," he adds in a sing-song of a murmur, hands resting on George's knee and rubbing up his thigh to squeeze at the firm muscle where his leg meets his hip. Part 2. George sighs, and the lines on his face soften a little as he looks at him. Smiling and shaking his head, he reaches one hand up to brush lightly over Chris's cheek, a fond look in his eyes, one that has long since become familiar to him, comforting almost, something he can rely on when he's overwhelmed and needs a sympathetic ear and a soft touch. Even when he's furious and raging, he wants nothing more than to be pushed against the wall and taken until he can't remember his own name. He can still count on that fond look returning as he dresses and gasses up his things. If this isn't love, though that isn't it for either of them at the moment, but George has become a sort of mentor of his, someone to keep an eye on him in the time's overwhelming tide of publicity and rumors and blah, blah, blah. He's putting his dick in you. He's not a mentor. "You shouldn't have said what you said," George chastises quietly, letting his hand sweep through his graying hair before falling back down into his lap. "About the ring?" Chris mumbles. George nods. "Sorry, I wasn't thinking." He closes his eyes for a moment and takes a deep breath. "I can make it up to you." George hums, sounding mildly amused, but doesn't protest when Chris opens his eyes and settles one hand over his groin, rubbing gently as he burrows his face into his neck and inhales the smell of cologne and smoke, and man, they've never managed to find on any other men of his age. He kisses slowly over the side of his neck, tasting the bitterness of his aftershave and the faint hit of salty sweat on his tongue. His finger deftly Unbuckling. Unbuckling George's belt and tugging open the button on his suit pants. He drapes his hand around the outline of George's cock and quickly hardening under his fingers as he strokes his palm through the fabric. Fabric? Wow. A low, rough sound vibrates from the lips of George's throat as he squeezes and kneads at his cock, kissing a little more hungrily than when his legs fell apart as he leans back against the couch. Chris tugs at George's tie so he can unbutton the top 2 buttons off his shirt, pushing the fabric aside and tucking it down to look at it across his collarbone. He breathes out hard against him, closing his eyes for a moment when George's hand settles on his shoulder and presses down in a sense of gentle insistence. Chris bites and grins playfully at his clavicle before sliding off the couch and onto the floor, positioning himself between George's legs and looking up at him with a smirk as he rubs his cheek to the inside of his thigh. He nuzzles his nose against his crotch, mouthing his cock through his pants and humming softly when George's fingers find their way into his hair, running it over his scalp and tugging at his roots. Chris turns his head to the side to bite lightly at George's thigh before tucking his hands behind his knees and pulling him to the very edge of the couch, absently sliding his tongue along the back of his teeth as he unzips George's pants and dips his hand into the brief supply of his cock. He blows a puff of hot air across the tip, grinning as George inhales sharply and his fingers tighten in his hair, gently forcing his head down. He lets his lips brush over the head and along the ridge, pre-cum smearing across his lips and gathering along the tip of his tongue when he slides up across his upper lip. He leaves wet, loose kisses all over the slit, mouthing softly and straining his neck to fight against George, trying to force him down further. "Calm down, silly," he mumbles, laughing when George huffs in annoyance. Chris lets his mouth fall open and takes pity on him, sinking his lips around the cack and moving his head smoothly, stopping to swirl his tongue around the head and suck hard every few seconds, hands gripping firmly at George's thighs to keep them apart. Saliva and pre-cum mingle together and dribble over his lips to make the whole thing a little sloppy. Loud and wet smacks echo otherwise through the silent room, and George breathes ragged and quick above him. He runs his tongue along the vein running up the undersides of George's cack, the taste and feel of him heavy in his mouth sending arousal shooting through him. Fumbling with his own belt and zipper, he moans and chokes a little as he pulls out his own cack, pumping and twisting and squeezing around the base as he continues to slurp and swallow thickly around George's cack. George's fingers twist roughly in his hair, forcing him down as he grunts and jerks his hips up, Chris gagging a little at the head of his cock that hits the back of his throat, and hot cum comes down his tongue. He relaxes his throat and struggles to swallow, eyes watering a little as he squeezes them shut and whines, sucking in air through his nose. His lungs start to burn oxygen after a few more seconds, and he pulls away from the moment George releases him, gasping and coughing as he wipes the back of his hand over his mouth. He swallows a few times more and clears his throat. "Did that make it better?" he says croakily, grinning as he rests his head across George's thigh, hands loosely wrapped around his own hard cock. "No!" George grunts, tugging at his collar. "Come here!" Chris struggles to his feet, squeaking a little in surprise when George stands and forcing him down to bend over the arm of the couch, his cock pressed against the cold leather and his face buried in one of the throw pillows. He gasps and shivers when George yanks down his own pants and briefs. There's a sound of something rustling and wet, a slippery sound, followed by a low groan, and he knows George is behind him, fisting his own cack to make himself hard again. Ow. He ruts against the armrest, yelping when a hand comes down hard across his ass, leaving the flesh warm and stinging. "Stop!" George says sharply. He runs his fingers down Chris's crack, slick with lube, and Chris's muscles contract instinctively. He's painfully hard now, leaking pre-cum all over the couch that Matt Balmer had sat not 2 hours ago. The thought sends a thrill through him, and it makes his cack throb. He groans and pushes his ass back insistently. Another harsh slap across his ass makes him jump and shudder and arch his back, though a hand between his shoulders forces him almost immediately back down. He squeezes his eyes shut and bites his lips hard as 2 slick fingers push inside him, twisting and coiling until they press against his prostate as he squirms and shakes, whining loudly. They've done this so many times before they've reached the point where they rarely speak when it happens. It just simply does. They don't need to speak, though. A firm hand or a low groan is enough communication to what the other needs. And since it's really just sex at this point, he doesn't ever expect that to change any time soon. He's completely content with the arrangement, though. George is handsome and so much more mature than anyone else he's ever been with, and he's not concerned with looking for any permanent commitment, nor is... nor is Chris. It's cool. That's right. George pushes his shirt up his back, running his hand along the spine as he leans over him, and Chris shivers in anticipation, fingernails scratching over the leather of the couch. He feels George's cack pressing against his hold, the condom slick with lube not quite properly warm, though he doesn't care. He bites his lip again, the faint boiling stretch of his muscles taking his thighs tremble as George slams his hips forward, taking his hand into his back as he starts fucking him hard. His cack rubs against the couch, pre-cum slicking it up somewhat, though this friction is still a little rough and painful. For a few minutes, there's nothing but the sound of low grunts and groans and a slap of skin. George's hands firm on his hips as he fucks roughly into him, pushing him into the couch. His cock is aching as he scrabbles at the cushions, whining and sobbing weakly for each time George's cack slams against his prostate and sends waves of pleasure shooting through every fiber running under his skin. Fuck, 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 fuck! He whines and trembles as he comes between his own body and the armrest, body sliding slickly against the leather as George continues to snap his hips forward, ignoring his whimpers as he becomes oversensitive until he grabs his ass roughly and pushes further inside of him and comes into the condom with a gruff sound at the back of his throat. Chris drapes limply over the couch, panting and wincing as George pulls out of him. He hears him tucking up and fastening his pants, tossing the condom in the trash before Chris has gathered himself enough to stand up straight, wobbling a little and blinking away, the white lights popping across his eyelids. He nearly overbalances and grabs at the back of the couch to steady himself, a hand settling on the small of his back to catch him as he stumbles again, the effects of the alcohol still heavy in his blood. Are you still mad at me? He slays, blinking owlishly as soft, damp cloth slides over his stomach and his briefs and pants are pulled up again. George chuckles and ruffles his hair a little, and just like that reminds Chris of how different they really are, that he's just a child in his eyes, no matter how much he's done and accomplished before, and because, in all honesty, he is a child compared to, I'm scared, compared to him. Not that that matters, though. Sex is sex, and they've gained mutual respect from the experience. Chris has called himself a mentor. They can both say they've become friends in the loose definition of the word. What the fuck am I reading? Nah, I'm not mad at you, George says, tone softening as Chris struggles to do up his pants and his belt and tries to tug on his jacket upset down before finally righting it and sliding it into his arms. Just be careful, kid, okay? I know it doesn't seem like a big deal, but it could go to hell if a lot of people find out about this. Chris mumbles a reply, hoping it suffices. He can't quite make his mouth form coherent sentences at the moment. George seems to take what he can get, though, and he slides and tosses his hair once more. Don't do it again, got it? Chris grunts. Oh, God. He grunts, picking up the glass on the table and is absently wiping away the moisture that had gathered there with his sleeve. Mm-hmm, Chris murmurs, checking his pocket for his wallet and yawning. Do you need a cab? George says, pausing at the doorway, tie loose and short half-button, hair mussed, though he still manages to look devastatingly handsome in spite of it. I can get it, Chris says, waving his phone. I'll see you. George gives him the familiar fond look before sighing and turning to leave, shaking his head a little as he walks away, the sound of his retreating footsteps loud in the silence. Chris yawns again, scratches absently at the back of his neck, and stumbles out to the massive entry and into the warm light. Oh, that was riveting. Apparently, well, I guess, George Clooney believes that Christopher Colfer is a child and that sex is sex. That was interesting. I hope you all enjoyed it.